Hello friends, it's Kristie Marcotte. I'm sharing some cards using Pink & Main's October 2019 Crafty Courtyard kit. The theme is Encouraging Words. As I'm recording this voiceover, the kit is still available. However, quantities are limited since it is a monthly kit. Pink & Main does require a 3-month subscription commitment, but they offer other discounts to subscribers, and their kits always include a lot of fun crafty goodies. I have included links in the description box if you are interested in purchasing this kit. So let's go ahead and get started with card number 1. I'm using a sketch from Mojo Monday. This is number 523. And I have 2 different pattern papers for the background. Cut them in 2-inch strips and just put them side by side. And the kit does include some cardstock, but I also will be using additional cardstock since I add a lot of layers to my cards. The kit has these beautiful silver foil doilies, so I'm going to use one of those for the background. And then instead of the other circle like pictured on the sketch, I'm going to use this stitched banner to add my sentiment. And I'm going to do some heat embossing. The sentiment is, "You are loved." So I first used some anti-static powder, then stamped the sentiment using some Versamark ink. And now I'm using some Love from Lizzie embossing powder, and this is this beautiful baby blue party color. It has little pieces of glitter, holographic. So it has a lovely sparkle, and the blue matches beautifully with the blue in the paper collection. So go ahead and heat set that. I don't know if you can totally see it, but it has this beautiful sparkle to it. And then I'm going to layer that sentiment piece onto some more of this light blue cardstock. The stamp set that's included in the kit this month is all sentiments, and I absolutely love that since I don't do a lot of coloring, and the sentiments are all encouraging, uplifting. They're perfect. I know I will be using it all the time. So I just added some foam dimensional tape to the back of this sentiment banner so I could pop that up. I do like to add just a small strip of the pattern paper on the inside of the card, and that's just for a little extra detail. Put a small stitched banner in that upper right hand corner of the card, and now I'll use a few of the sequins. Just adding 2 of them in the lower left hand corner. So there is my finished card, and I did make 2 using this sketch. So now moving on to card number 2, which is actually cards 3 and 4. Almost all of the cards I made 2 of, but there are a few I only made 1, simply because I didn't have enough of that same pattern paper to make 2 identical cards. For this card, I'm using a sketch from MFT. This is number 453. So I have 2 different pattern papers. I have this little plaid design in the center, and then just some thin strips of blue polka dot paper for the outside pieces. And then I'm using some of the pearlescent green paper that's included in the kit. Just cut these, it's about 1/4 of an inch width strips. That way it adds a little bit of separation between those 2 pattern papers. And I'll just layer all of that with some more of the blue cardstock, add my card front to a card base, and then using that same blue cardstock, I cut out this stitched circle die cut. Then using a stitched banner die cut, I'm going to stamp the sentiment, and I am using my mini MISTI just to make sure I get a good stamped impression. And I just trim off that left-hand side since it was just a little bit too long. And then I'm just going to pop it up using some thin foam squares. And then I'll put that right over that circle die cut. I really like the paper collection that's included in the kit. It doesn't have a specific theme to it, so you could use this for any card theme. It even has a nice spring look to it with the beautiful soft colors. And then just to finish off this card, I added a few of the gems that are included in the kit, and then also that pattern paper strip on the inside of the card. And I did make 2 cards using this sketch. So So now moving on to cards 5 and 6, I'm using another MFT sketch. This is number 456. I thought this was a fun sketch with those two triangles in the background. So I have two different pattern papers. I cut them, I believe it was 4 by 5 1/4, and then I just cut them in half to form the two triangles. So again, I will be making two identical cards using this sketch, and it was perfect because I had those two triangle pieces. So I layered all of that with some pink cardstock. And then I cut this stitch tag out of that same pink cardstock, and I'm going to do some heat embossing. Treated the paper with the anti-static powder and then stamped it a few times using the Versamark ink. Then I'm using some of the white embossing powder by Wow. I believe this was in one of Pink and Main's first kits possibly. It might have been their March kit. White is just a really good color to have on hand, and it looks beautiful with some darker cardstock. So let's go ahead and heat set this sentiment, and this is the largest sentiment that's included on the stamp set. Nice, big, bold, let your faith be bigger than your fear. I love that sentiment. So I'm going to use some of the twine that's included in the kit, and I doubled it up and then just looping it through the hole in the tag. And then just to make sure it stays secure, I put a small piece of score tape behind just to hold that twine. And then I'm going to pop up the whole tag using some foam dimensional tape. And I do like to make sure to get good coverage so there isn't one part of the tag that's going to sag at all. Go ahead and remove the backing. And then I'll just place it on the card in the center. So I'm not really following this sketch exactly. It's more for just some inspiration. I even cut my triangles the wrong direction, but that's okay, it still works. Then finishing touch, I just added a few of the silver glossy dots by Pink and Main. So there are my two cards using this sketch. So now moving on to cards 7 and 8, I'm using Sweet Sunday sketch number 230. I'm using some orange polka dot paper for the background, and then this plaid paper with the pink, blue, and orange stripes in it. And I really love this pink and the orange colors together. Just that soft, almost a sherbet color. Looks really pretty. So layer that all in some of the orange cardstock. And now I'm going to stamp a sentiment using some of a Pink and Main's ink. It's a beautiful pink color that matches almost perfectly with the paper collection. So this sentiment is tomorrow is a new day. So layer that in some more of this orange cardstock. And then I'm just adding a small piece of cardstock on the right hand side underneath, just because it's going off of those other layers. I always like to keep things nice and even on my cards. So I put my pattern paper strip on the inside of the card, add a small stitched banner in that upper right hand corner. And then I'm using two of the white heart buttons that are included in the kit. I'm also threading some of the twine through those buttons. And I did one ahead just because sometimes I struggle trying to get that thread through the small hole. I know I could use a little threading tool, but I usually make it work. And then instead of tying a bow, I just do a knot and then I unravel the ends. I like the look, and it's a little easier than trying to mess with the bow. And I'll just attach those to my card using some glue dots. And then I felt like the card needed just a little something in that lower section right underneath the sentiment. So I just cut a real thin banner. And this is a die from Pink and Main. It's meant for some small sentiments, but it's great to add for just a little extra embellishment on a card as well. So I'll just add a little bit of foam dimension on the side that's hanging off of all those layers. And then I just cut a small star out of this same pink cardstock. I use some liquid adhesive to attach it to the card, and then just to add a little bit of sparkle, I'm using a Wink of Stella glitter pen just in the clear. So there are my two finished cards using this sketch. Now moving on to card number 9. This sketch is by Reverse Confetti. It's number 5. And if you are interested in any of the sketches that I use during this video, I do share all of that information on my coordinating blog post. It has the sketch, including all of the measurements. So on this card, the background, I'm using this green tone-on-tone chevron paper, and I'm layering it in some of this pearlescent cardstock that's included in the kit. And then I have some pink polka dot paper for this rectangle piece. I love this green and pink together. It's real pretty. I use some of the solid pink twine. I'm going to wrap it twice around the card and then just adhere the ends on the back using some score tape. First, going to make sure it was straight. And then I'll go ahead and adhere this card front onto a card base. And I did round the bottom corners using my corner chomper. Lots of adhesive just to make sure it doesn't pop off of my card. And then I'll tie a bow. So first I just looped that twine underneath the two pieces going across the card, and then I can tie my little bow, trim away the excess. And now I'm going to stamp my sentiment. So using this pink ink again, I actually use this quite a bit since it matches so perfectly with the pattern paper. So this one is I Am Here For You Always. So I'll layer that using some more of this pearlescent paper, attach it to my card, and then for those 3 circle elements on this sketch, I'm using some of the buttons that are included in the kit. So I love that there was pink and then also the green, and they have hearts on them. And the only thing I don't like about the buttons is you can't have the holes level with the pattern design. It's like only the one on the lowest button that I used, everything was lined up straight, but the other 2 buttons, it wasn't. And so I felt like it was just a little bit off because I couldn't have those 2 holes level, but I wanted the pattern design to still be straight. Maybe it's just the OCD crafter in me, that something like that just bothers me. So I'm just going to attach all of these using some glue dots, and I did pop up just the top part of the pink using a little bit of foam dimension, once again just to keep everything nice and even on the card. Add that small piece of pattern paper on the inside, and I did also round the corners on that piece, otherwise it would look a little off. But now moving on to card number 10. The sketch is MFT sketch number 389. And I used some more of this green pearlescent paper, and I could only make 1 card because that was almost all of that green pearlescent paper I had left. I used the embossing folder that looks like snow, but I think it's called Falling Dots. Thought that was real pretty for the background. And then just a small piece of some of the plaid pattern paper, layering all that in a darker green cardstock. And just because I was adhering that piece of paper onto specialty paper, like the pearlescent paper, I did use some liquid adhesive just to make sure it was going to stay in place. I stamped the sentiment using the pink ink again, and then I did a diagonal cut on the very end of the sentiment instead of a fishtail, basically following the sketch. And then I'll adhere that right below that pattern paper piece. I do have some ATG, but then again I am using more of the liquid adhesive, and just to make sure it's not going to pop off of the card later. And then I'll add my card front onto a card base. And for I think all of the cards this time, I am leaving just that 1/8 of an inch showing of the white card base. With the nice light soft colors, I really like having that look on all of my cards. So just some finishing touches. I'm using a few of the green gems, and then also adding a small banner in the upper left hand corner. And I did decide to pop this up using some thin foam squares. It'll also help make sure it's not going to pop off of the card later. And then I cut 2 small hearts out of pink cardstock, and I'm just putting them, kind of nestling them above the sentiment. And for that larger heart, since it is going over the gap between the pattern paper and the sentiment strip, I did put just a thin piece of foam dimension and then some liquid adhesive. And then for the second heart, also using a little bit more of that foam dimension just to pop it up a little bit more from the larger heart. So there is my finished card, and I believe that's card number 10. So now moving on to card number 11. The sketch is Freshly Made Sketches number 356. And this is a great sketch to use some of those smaller pattern paper scraps that you may have left over. So I have some blue polka dot paper for the background, and then using a few different pattern papers for those thin strips. And then I also wanted to use the washi tape that's included in the kit. And it is translucent, so I wanted to make sure you would still be able to see that design. So I first attached it to some white cardstock. And I'll just layer that in some more of this blue cardstock. And then I'm just going to center this on the background of the card. And then I'll just layer that whole panel on some more of this light blue cardstock. So now I'll go ahead and add these 3 pattern paper strips. And the white cardstock that I added that washi tape to is actually a fairly heavyweight cardstock. Probably should have used something a little more lightweight. But just to make sure all of these strips aren't going to be a little off on the card, I'm just adding some more of that cardstock underneath the top and bottom of each of those strips. So nobody's going to see that part, but that way it'll look like everything's nice and even on the card. And now I can go ahead and attach all 3 of those strips to the card. I lay them all out on the card first, and then I can start attaching them. Usually start with the outer 2 and then work my way in. And I'll go ahead and add my card front onto a card base. And for the sentiment, I cut out an oval die cut in white and then also in some blue cardstock. And then just to make sure I get a good stamped impression, I'm going to use my mini MISTI. And I could stamp the sentiment first and then cut it out, but I tend to do the die cut first and then the stamping. So I always save that extra piece of the paper where I cut out that shape, and then I just add that piece into my mini MISTI, and then I just hold the piece down using either some of the magnets or sometimes the washi tape, just depending on how much extra space I have before stamping the sentiment. So go ahead and add that sentiment oval onto the matted layer. And then I'm going to pop that up using some foam dimensional tape. Now, even though I'm only using the sentiments for all of my cards, you can easily add some images. So go ahead and center my oval on the card. And now to add a few finishing touches, I'm using another one of the buttons. Now this time I did decide to tie a bow, but I did that off screen because again I was fussing with it for a little while. Attach that to the card using a glue dot. And then I'll add 3 of the sequins in that upper left hand corner, and I'll just attach those to the card using some multimedia mat. The sequin mix is full of these beautiful soft colors that match with the paper collection perfectly, and there's even some tiny little flowers mixed in there. So once I think I have them all nice and straight, there is my card all finished, and that is card number 11. So now moving on to cards 12 and 13, I'm using a sketch from OWH. This is number 123. And this used to always be my favorite sketch, and I realized I haven't used it in a long time. So I was ready to pull out and give it a try again. I'm using some green polka dot paper for the background, and then this fun plaid paper for that strip, that smaller rectangle strip. Has a nice wide stripe of the blue, and then has some more of the green and orange in there. And then I'm just using some of the solid cardstock for this large banner piece that goes down that left-hand side. I did put a small piece of cardstock on that upper portion, once again just to keep it nice and even on the card. Put my card front onto a card base. And then I'll stamp my sentiment using my mini MISTI. And this time I'm using an orange color since there's no pink on this pattern paper this time. So this is again one of Pink and Main's inks. And it does stamp a little bit darker at first, but then it does lighten up. So it matches almost perfectly with this cardstock. So go ahead and attach that to my card. And then instead of that heart embellishment, I'm just using a small blue star. I'm going to pop that up using some thin foam dimension. And I felt like there was a big gap underneath the sentiment and just needed a little something. So I'm going to use some of Nuvo's glitter drops. But before I add the Nuvo drops, I did remember to add that strip of pattern paper on the inside of the card. And now I'll just put 3 small drops right underneath that sentiment. And this is the Summer Sunrise color. So there are my 2 cards using this sketch. Now moving on to cards 14 and 15. Using reverse confetti sketch number 42. I decided to use this really colorful lattice design pattern paper for the background, and then for the diagonal strip I'm just using some of the yellow cardstock. So whenever I have a diagonal strip going across a card, unless I have a specific die cut shape, I find it easier to just have that paper longer than the card front, add some adhesive, lay it right in place, and then just trim off the edges. And it helps to do it before you add it to any of your background matted paper. I have some purple polka dot paper for that larger rectangle piece. And then I have a stitched circle die cut where I'm adding my sentiment. And this is "Life is tough, but darling, so are you." Isn't that a sweet sentiment? And I just put that on a scalloped circle die cut using some more of this purple cardstock just for that strip behind the sentiment. I thought about using a different color, but I thought any of the other colors were just kind of standing out too much, so I just went with that same purple cardstock. I'm going to put a small stitched banner in that upper left-hand corner, and then just a finishing touch, I'm adding just 2 of the sequins. I felt like that was enough. There's a lot of busy colors and everything going on this card, and I think that was sufficient. So once again, I did make 2 cards using this sketch. And now moving on to my final 2 cards. This is number 16 and 17, and it's actually my 10th card design. So that was my goal, to make sure I have at least 10 different samples for you. I'm using some orange cardstock for the background, and then 2 different pattern papers for these 2-inch strips that go behind the square element of this card. And you can see I have a big square cut out of that layered cardstock. So this is some more of the pearlescent cardstock that's included in the kit. And I didn't have a whole lot of it, so I made sure to take advantage and cut out that piece. And then I started attaching my card front onto my card base, and I forgot that I wanted to add some twine. So I did end up pulling all of that off. Did ruin the card base, but that's okay. Wrapped some of the pink and white twine along the bottom of the card. I'm going to adhere the ends to the back of the card, and then I'm using an extra piece of score tape just to make sure that it's going to stay in place on my card base. So add more ATG, and then I'll thread some of that twine underneath the other 2 pieces, and later I will tie a bow. Then I have a little reverse scalloped square die cut because I'm going to be doing a shaker card. I'll be adding the sentiment in the background window of that shaker card, so I'm going to stamp a sentiment twice. That way I don't have to fill that shaker card quite as much, and then there's something in that window. So now I'm going to put together the little shaker window. I'm going to add some thin score tape on the edges, peel off the backing, and then I can attach my acetate. And then next I'll use some of the foam dimensional tape. And since I will need a double layer of it, a trick that I learned is to fold it in half first, and then you can go ahead and cut out all your pieces, and you only have to do it once. So this frame is very thin, so I had to cut super tiny pieces of this foam dimensional tape just to make sure it's not visible through the window. And I just adhere one piece at a time, making sure the next piece is nice and snug. That way none of the little sequins are going to escape. So that final piece is always the trickiest, just to make sure it is the right length. So now I'll add just a little bit of the anti-static powder along the edges, trying to prevent some of those sequins from sticking to the edge. Scoop in a nice amount of the sequin mix, and then I'll add that sentiment backing, hoping that I get it nice and straight. Give it a good press just to make sure it's all sealed. And then to attach it to my card, I'm going to use some more score tape. Just because it has a little extra weight with all of those sequins, the score tape helps to make sure it's going to stay secure. So I'll center that on my card. And then I can tie my little bow in that lower left-hand corner. And then just for a finishing touch, I'm going to use some Nuvo crystal drops, and this is the pink orchid color. Just putting 3 of them in that upper right-hand corner. And there is my finished card, and I did make 2. Although on that first card, I only stamped the Keep Smiling once, so that's why I decided to do it twice for the second card, just to fill in that window. So now here's just a quick recap of the 17 cards I made using Pink & Main's October 2019 Crafty Courtyard kit. I really enjoyed this kit with all of the soft colors and the wonderful sentiment stamp set that's included. As I'm recording this voiceover, the kit is still available, but it is a monthly kit and they do sell out every single month. So I will have links in the description box if you are interested in subscribing. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and don't forget to give it a thumbs up. I always appreciate the support. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.